This week in politics, it's kind of like we've had either two prime ministers or no prime ministers, depending on how you count them. Of course, there is the caretaker prime minister in Chris Hipkins and the prime minister in waiting in Christopher Luxon. But honestly, it seems as we are, half a week after the special votes were counted, we know more about the state of the opposition and who sits where than we do about the incoming government. Joining us on the program now, political commentator and director of Democracy Project, Dr. Bryce Edwards. Bryce, kia ora, good morning. Thanks for your time.
Morning, Andrew.
It is an unusual situation. Firstly, wanting to start with Labour, because honestly, we know a lot more about what's happening in that significantly diminished part of the House than we do about the incoming government. Chris Hipkins held on to the role as Prime Minister. Is that because he's got the confidence of his remaining colleagues, or is that because nobody else wanted it, Bryce?
Oh, I think it's all of those things, Andrew. I mean, we had the final vote come out on Friday for Labour, and they, officially are just under 27% of the vote.
Yep.
So they've dropped from 50% to 27%. So it was an astonishing landslide against Chris Hipkins' government.
Yep.
And so he's now the leader of the opposition, and Labour have a lot of soul searching to do, rebuilding, and they need to, at some stage, work out whether, Chris Hipkins or someone else is going to be the person that does that rebuilding. But they've taken what I think is probably the sensible decision to keep Hipkins in there for the moment while they have a pause. So they had their first caucus meeting yesterday, basically, where the new MPs and, the new caucus met together. And constitutionally, Labour had to have a vote, essentially, on the leadership. And yes, Chris Hipkins, as we know, was elected, and Carmel Stepanoni was elected as the deputy, which a lot of people wouldn't be aware that she wasn't currently the deputy leader of the Labour Party.
Yeah.
That was actually Kelvin Davis. And so she became the deputy. And Chris Hipkins, I mean, it's really hard for parties that have been in government to work out what to do with their leadership after a big defeat. And so you can think back to something like, I don't know, remember Robert Muldoon, he'd been Prime Minister from 1975 through to 1984. Once they were swept out of office, Muldoon wanted to stay in, and he wanted to continue leading the National Party.
Yeah.
He hung around, I think, for about a year. But probably better examples would be someone like Mike Moore, who came in just, less than a year after the fourth Labour government were sent out of office in 1990. And he tried to stay in and continued to be leader. He was allowed to stay on and fight that next election as leader.
Yep.
Then, of course, you had Bill English. He was he took over from John Key for the last year of that national government. But again, that was voted out. And he very quickly left and handed it on to someone else. So what's best for Labour? Do they try to have someone new and flash and change the narrative, or do they keep with someone who's quite competent but has just lost an historic election? So there's no clear answer, really. So I think other people will be talking about policy more than the leadership, I think.
One of the things that we've seen in terms of patterns in previous years is whoever is the leader of the opposition, the major opposition party, doesn't stay the leader until the next election. That's been consistent over the last few years. Yeah, basically. So he is the Prime Minister for now. Carmel Stepanoni, as you mentioned, as deputy, is she... is this like a holding pattern that she will be perhaps leader of the Labour Party before the next election, do you think?
Look, I think that's where the smart money is. Carmel Stepanoni has proven a very solid and strong performer as a minister. Yeah. It's yet to be seen whether she could win an election for Labour. And of course, there's some symbolism there as being a person of colour leading, that would lead the Labour Party and be a potential, first Prime Minister of colour in New Zealand.
Yeah.
That would be sort of progress for a lot of people. But
although significant that Kelvin Davis is stepping down, no longer a Maori deputy, giving the in some cases the significant losses for Labour in the Māori electorates. A bit of signalling there, do you think?
Oh, look, that's a really good question, because one of the most astonishing part of the final election results on Friday was the fact that Te Pāti Māori actually picked up another 2 electorates that they were behind on anyhow, and so they swept 6 out of the 7 electorates, and this was an astonishing defeat for Labour's Māori caucus. And so we're still trying to work out what went wrong there for Labour.
I mean, Kelvin Davis says he's not sticking around after this term, but that the Māori caucus didn't offer an alternative to him seems significant, or maybe they did behind the scenes. Who knows?
Well, I guess I would emphasise that vote yesterday is only probably a short-term decision.
Okay.
So, Labour will very clearly be wanting to rethink things for next year, I think. They've done the sensible thing in that leadership team, I think. But I will be totally shocked if that's the leadership team that is still around in a year or so's time.
Yeah, certainly. Now, on the other side of the House, and we know very little about who's going to sit where on the benches or on the cross benches, or who's going to be part of the coalition government, what portfolios they will get. Odds that we'll find out anything by the end of the week are pretty small, Bryce. But in terms of the timing, we've got to move on, right?
Well, do we? Once, as we talked about last week, I sense that the country is not unhappy to have less politics happening for a while, and things still work in New Zealand without it having a proper government. And be careful what you wish for.
Okay.
Once we have a new government, there's going to be some tumultuous times, and we're going to be back into some heavy politics.
All of the fun and games that is coalition government in that regard. I mean, not just hard work for Labour in the next term, though. I mean, National, whilst they are able to form a government, not a particularly strong majority. They would be wanting to improve that majority over this term, but I mean that's a bit of a tough challenge for them, right?
Look, National won the election, as is said, but they got 37% of the vote, and it was their second worst election result since 2002. So, yes, they're victorious, but I think National will be putting a lot of attention into that 2026 election already, thinking, well, how do we actually get this up to the 40s? And we won't just do it through reversing what Labour's done. That won't be enough. They actually will have to bring the country with them and build some new things, some new policies that aren't just tax cuts, aren't just making cuts to the public service. They will need some positive things. And
too much coalition compromise is just going to muddy the waters on, okay, so what is national policy and what is sort of this government Frankenstein policy, as it were?
Yes, government Frankenstein is a good way of putting it. And Winston Peters, he's said this week that he thinks a coalition agreement could be signed any day, really. But he's also said that he's happy to walk away if National doesn't offer a good enough deal for him. And that is really him flexing his muscles there. And I wouldn't be surprised if it does take another 2 weeks or more to come up with something, because he's playing nice. Well, he has been playing nice, but no, both ACT and New Zealand First really do have to win some substance in order to also be re-elected at the next election. And Winston Peters knows that if he's to have a legacy, if he's to have his party to continue, he does need these next few days of coalition negotiations to bring something strategically useful for him.
Hey, it's going to be interesting to see what does happen and what does emerge in the next couple of weeks. So, Bryce, thank you so much for your insight as always. Thanks for joining us today.
Okay, thanks, Andrew.